I am no sweat. A Kentucky author and man who raises racing pigeons all my life. I'm now going on 71 years old, and I had pigeons when I was 7, so I'm starting my 64th year with raising pigeons. And all those years I've had Sions. Some people call them Sions, but they're pronounced Sions. And those birds were originally created by a man in France named Paul Sion. And he was a wealthy man who was involved with racehorses, and he loved show dogs, and had many pursuits, but racing pigeons is one of the main things that he was most noted for. And he had a son named Robert. Paul died shortly after World War II, and Robert took the birds after that and went back to the French underground and got the birds that they had given to the French underground and reestablished the Sion family. And both Paul and his son exported birds all over the world into the United States. And one of the people they exported to, possibly the most exportations between the two of them, 7 exportations that I know of, came to Paul and to Robert, from Paul and Robert to Charles Heitzman, who was like my father in the racing pigeon sport. The last years of Heitzman's life, I spent a lot of time at his home, slept in a bedroom that he kept for me there, helped him work on every facet that you can do with racing pigeons. I didn't want to, I've got Jeremy's shooting this today, this video. He's the same person who shot the last video. Today's August 26, 2021. And my birthday was on August 23rd. I wanted to shoot a different kind of video than all the other pigeon guys do. I've always written different kinds of articles than the other pigeon guys do. And so I wanted to shoot one in my home and let the pigeon sport and riders see who I am. Being the age that I am now, a lot of the things that I've had in my hands, I've collected lots of stuff. I don't have it anymore. I've sold it, traded it. It's been stolen, or I gave it away, or whatever. But between Indian relics and Kentucky agate and Civil War relics combined, I've probably dug more than anybody that's ever lived. And I have very little of it left. I've been very lucky all my life in finding things, as well as finding a good wife. I wanted to start out, I'm not one of those pigeon guys that has giant pigeon portraits and trophies all over the place. I have hardly any. I've won over 1,000 places, first places with racing pigeons in my life, and I know that, and that's enough. But I do have a couple of pictures here. This little hen was a hen that I took out 50 miles on her first toss, and then I took her 500 miles the second toss. She came back at the break of daylight on the second toss, and her nest mate came back about 15 minutes behind her. And it was real impressive to me. She was a little tiny bird, a little tiny blue chick.
Yeah.
And that's Pegley. Pegley really is the one that put me on the map as a pigeon person. He was unbanded. He got his leg caught in a rat trap, and he hobbled around for a long time. That's how I gave him that name. But I found out that every baby that I raised out of this nothing pigeon, it took him 2 days to come home from 50 miles. But every baby he ever raised, didn't matter if I mated him to a duck, that they were all champion pigeons. His babies won the Twin City Gold Band Futurity race, and they won the Waldo Hotchkiss race. They won the Lexington, Kentucky 500-mile race, the futurity race, on and on and on. This was a fabulous pigeon for me, and just as very little ever, pedigree wise or anything else really known about him. He was one of those 1 in a million pigeons that everybody dreams to have, a great breeder. and he'll always be in my heart. He taught me one thing about racing pigeons, that the one thing that you do look for in racing pigeons always, number one, is homing instinct. You can forget all about all the other theories. Homing instinct is the single most important thing to look for, and you find that with long distance racing pigeons more than any other way. And he taught me that, and that's carried over for me all my life. In my lifetime, I've always been a writer first. Pigeon Man was second, and I've done a lot of writing in the pigeon magazines, all the different pigeon magazines, a lot of them all around the world. I was a columnist for 2 years for the Racing Pigeon in England. It's a weekly. A lot of people don't even know that. I wrote for the Racing Pigeon Pictorial in England. I wrote for the American Racing Pigeon News, the Racing Pigeon Bulletin, the Pocket Racing Pigeon, the Racing Pigeon Digest. I've got articles that's been in those magazines for now close to 50 years, and for about 40 years I've written under the name No Sweat. The first book that was ever published by me, the first book that was ever came out that was published, written by me. I'm not a self-published author. I would never pay to have my own work published. To me, that's a degradation of the quality of it. Speaks for itself. But the first book to come out that was by me is this book right here. I don't know what year it was, but it went through 800 rejections. So I had a belief inside of me that somebody would take this book sooner or later. Every major publisher throughout New York and in California, and just about every literary agent in New York and in California read my manuscript, this book. And finally, a small publisher here in Kentucky wanted the book, and I about fell over backwards. So, and it's been a slow seller, a fair seller. It hasn't set the world on fire. It's the journal of a man who raises pigeons and grows marijuana. And he lives next door to a man who is a retired Strategic Air Command bomber pilot who graduated from West Point and switched branches of service after he got out. And the two men are friends, and it's a journal of their lives together for 2 years in a mythical county in eastern Kentucky, the county called Aopa. This book received a lot of praise from Guy Davenport, one of the greatest literary critics we've ever had in the United States, and one of the leading psychiatrists, Miss Griffith, in the United States. And so that made me feel very good. And the book was also sent to the Pulitzer Committee for an attempt to try to win the Pulitzer Prize. It's called These Precious Days. It's easily found online, and that's a photograph of my wife and myself at the ocean. There are some sketches in the book that were done by a close friend of mine named Wallace Cotton Lewis. We called him Doc because his mother was Dr. Virginia in Urban, and they named the hospital after her. Doc died several years ago. He was a lifelong close friend of mine. And he's buried in an unmarked grave in Urban, Kentucky. That was my first book. My second book became published fairly quickly after. And that book is called Nefarious. And that book is based on a true story, based on a confession written by a man who was in solitary confinement for 45 days before he was hanged. He was the first legally hanged man in eastern Kentucky, and his name was Edward Hawkins. And I fell in love with the honesty of his confession. He was very funny in describing the crimes that he committed. He stole a horse here in Madison County and rode it back through Estill County up to Lee County, and a reward was posted for him. And when the sheriff and deputy went to arrest him from Estill County, he wound up killing both the sheriff and the deputy, murdered them. And then there was a big manhunt, and they finally caught him and had a big trial, and 10,000 people came to watch him hang. And he was supposed to have been the best looking man who ever lived, according to his brother and to a lot of women who saw him. I never did get an actual description, and I wanted to try to describe who I thought was the best looking man. or what the best looking man would be, and I thought of Clark Gable, and all the different movie stars. And it hit me one night, I thought I would describe him as Elvis Presley. And so that's who I have him looking like in my book, with the high cheekbones and the black hair and everything. This is the best work so far that's ever been published by me. It was published again by another small publisher in the western part of the state of Kentucky. And she died shortly after the book came out. And I've regained the publishing rights back to it and hope that this book will be republished again with additional work in it and a lot more of the sketches that were in the book. And again, the sketches that were in this book were done primarily by my friend Wallace Scott Lewis. We spent many hours together sitting at tables, and there's a sketch he did of cornbread and a whiskey jug and some onions. At one time, I have a scene where they're eating breakfast, and that's what they're eating for breakfast. The doc was. I have a scene where John Hunt Morgan is involved, and that's supposed to be John Hunt Morgan and one of my characters from Estill County. You can see Doc had a certain humor in the way he did things. Not everyone appreciated it. These are two hummingbirds that are flying around a marijuana plant, a big bud, a big female sensimillion plant. It's in one of the scenes that I have. Doc did several hundred sketches, and this is a picture that Doc did of Jenny Lind when P.T. Barnum got her to come to the United States, and that's Jenny Lind in her carriage coming to the Galt House in Louisville. You just have to read the book, but it's all about an outlaw. That was my second book. My third book was volume 1. There's 3 volumes. Was volume 1 of Singer Island and Ernest Hemingway. That's volume 1. That's the soft cover. I've got it here in the hardback. Singer Island and Ernest Hemingway. And that's an island where 4 generations of my family have lived since the end of World War II in the summers. It's a strip. This is one. That's the north end of Singer Island, and I still stay there about 2 months every year. And it's all about the scuba diving and fishing and my friends and the different people I've met there, members of the Kennedy family and Arlo Guthrie and John D. MacArthur and Burt Reynolds and a great many people. And I have pictures of those people in here and stories about them. I was very fortunate. Here's a picture of me when I was, I don't know, 13 years old, 12 years old, going to the Kentucky State Fair. I was one of the youngest people to ever win the Kentucky State Fair. I was the youngest person to ever win the National Racing Pigeon Show in White Plains, New York. I was the first person in the United States to ever win all 3 of the biggest major shows in the United States, all in the same year. There's a picture of Paul Sion. I have some stories about pigeons in this book because it's hard to understand how I can go and stay in Florida for 2 or 3 months unless you know about how I live with my pigeons, how my pigeons have taken care of me over the years. That's Charles Heitzman with the Kentucky Derby racehorse trainer who won the Derby. Here's Heitzman with country music. I'm trying to think who he is. Hold on just a second. I can't read in this dark room. He sang "Release Me" and "Heartaches by the Number" and "For the Good Times." This is, what is his name? Ray Price. That's Ray Price up at Charles Heitzman's, real famous country music singer. And that's Charles Heitzman's son, who was Charles Heitzman Jr., and he was one of the top dogs in the Signal Corps in World War II. And he brought pigeons over to England from the United States to be used by the military. And you'll see him there with Sarah Churchill. That's Winston Churchill's daughter. And Sarah knew as much about the British plans and what they did in World War II, as did Winston. And here's Charles Heitzman with a real famous movie star. Oh, Lordy. Andy Devine. He talked like this because he fell off of his porch when he was a boy and hurt his throat. And Andy had Sions. And Andy had a cat that was getting in his loft and killing his birds. And Andy caught the cat and tied some dynamite to the cat and lit the dynamite. And the cat turned around and ran back up underneath his pigeon loft and blew his loft to pieces and killed all of his birds. Anyways, these are just some different stories and pictures. There's Old 51. It's a very famous pigeon. I talk about him a lot, almost every day. My brick reds, which are fairly famous throughout the United States, they all come down from Old 51. I'll put this book back up. That's not what I'm doing. But you can see that's in this book, Singer Island and Ernest Hemingway. And you can find this book online. That's volume 1. There's a volume 2, and I'm working on volume 3. The next book that came out was this book. It's Letters from a Genius to an Oaf. And that's Guy Davenport, one of the most famous writers and literary critics in the United States while he was alive. Graduated from Duke, was a Rhodes Scholar, recipient of the John D. MacArthur Foundation Genius Award, and a very close friend of mine. His correspondence and mine are now in the archives at the University of Texas. This book is a whole lot about our relationship that we had with each other and correspondence. I wrote Guy around 500 letters, and Guy wrote me back about 200 letters in our lifetime. But Guy lived in Lexington, and I was often over at his house at 621 Sayre. Guy lived, breathed, and eat English and writing. That's my wife, Justine. He loved Justine and Nancy both. Nancy's my daughter. But these are, and this book was selling very well. And this is the person who introduced me to Guy Davenport. And that was my next door neighbor, Lindy Yeager, who graduated from West Point. And you'll see him here in these pictures in his West Point uniform. And that was a big deal for my home county, for somebody to go to West Point and graduate. West Point was like a dream, and then for him to become a Strategic Air Command bomber pilot, not just a pilot, but possibly the best pilot during the Cold War era, was pretty fantastic. Lindy was very brilliant, knew the Bible very much, and also knew a lot about Ernest Hemingway. Lindy committed suicide, and kind of broke my heart when he did that. Another one of my friends that killed themselves. And then the last book that I've written that's been published, I've got several books that I'm working on. There's a collection of short stories. I just wanted to get some of these stories out. It's called Black Bluegrass. And I think there's 16 stories in here. A few of them involve pigeons. Some of them involve archaeology. Some of them, one of them's about the 30 days that I spent digging at Fort Boonesboro with the University of Kentucky. And this is about Price Cave, where I dug on and off for 4 years in a cave, dug 22 foot deep, and excavated several burials there that carbon dated 3,100 years old. And I wrote a manuscript which University of Kentucky loved. I had at one time, and it was never published. Miracle on East Irvin Street is just simply a story about 3 friends of mine that froze to death one night in Richmond. They all were drunk and died in a house, froze to death together. It was my remembrance of them, all the things they used to do. But that's what that book is. So I love to write, and like I said, I've been doing it all my life. I don't want to talk too much more about that. These 2 fish came from Wyoming. They're in shell, and they're fossils. And I have a friend who's been in National Geographic several times who cuts these fish out of the shell in a quarry there, and then takes a dental tool and cleans them down. And I forget the name, scientific name, Nogonius or something to that. But anyways, they're pretty cool. That's a trilobite from Morocco. These are all fossils. And that's a leaf from Canada. Those seashells there are typical seashells that Chestine and I, my wife and I, find when we walk on the beach on Singer Island. We look for those particular ones, or got the stripes on them like that. Kind of little game we play with each other. Yeah, all these conch shells up here on top, they're all conch shells that I brought back from Eleuthera, an outer island in the Bahamas where Chestine and I stayed. Anywhere from 4 weeks to 6 weeks for about 10 straight years. And we met a lot of people there and had a lot of great experiences in Eleuthera. It's an island that's 110 miles long and about 1 mile wide. So you're always on the ocean, you've always got a breeze. And there are some incredibly beautiful water there along the pink sand beaches. I've written a lot about Eleuthera on the internet. Some of it's still there. One of the things that I've done a lot of in my life is hunt for agate. And when you hunt for agate in Kentucky, there's one agate that is the rarest and it's considered the most beautiful and most expensive agate in all the world. And it's Kentucky red agate. And here's just one of the samples. This was the very first one I ever found. And I use that in my book. You have to, it's 4 times harder than steel. So you have to polish it down. Can you come over here where there's some light? Let me show how pretty this is. Let's walk in here for a second. If I can. This light's sort of yellow. It doesn't really give it justice. But we call that Marlboro red. And it's minerals that are found in the shell, a real rich shell layer. That's manganese and iron and sulfur and calcite that are found. And sometimes I find copper deposits, and I find different minerals in it. And it is very beautiful. People make belt buckles and rings and knife handles and then just use them as museum specimens. I've had 2 of my rocks go to the Smithsonian and to several science museums. The big science museum in Cincinnati has one of my Kentucky red agates. They're very rare, and it's almost like finding gold when you do find one. That's what they look like on the outside, so you have to know what to look for. Aston Lee in Jackson County, it'll just be what we call the yellow agate. You can see there's a huge difference between the two. And even a little yellow agate like that, is worth like $40 or something. I won't talk anymore. I'll talk about swimming for a minute. I'm just rambling a little bit, trying to give you some idea who I am. When I went to college at Eastern, I swam long distance. I would swim 500 yards, and then I would swim 1,000 yards, and then I would race a mile. I didn't swim it. I raced 500, and then raced 1,000, and then raced a mile. That's me when I was a sophomore, right there. And that would be 1970. And we went 15-1 that year, and I swam with 18 All-Americans. So I spent a lot of time in the water, running around talking about things that's in this one room. And I've got 4 cannonballs here. And this is a big mortar shell that was dug up at Yorktown. I had a friend that I met at a Civil War show where they bring in excavated relics and sell them. I bought this past year from him, and he dug that at Yorktown. And Yorktown's where George Washington basically cornered Cornwallis, and that's where the American Revolution War was won at. So this is a historically pretty cool cannonball. And you can see these other ones, that's a 12-pounder with a fuse in it. And that's a 6-pounder with a fuse in it. These are actually fairly rare, the 6-pounders with fuses in them. And this is another mortar shell. Alan Jones and I dug one up like this at Camp Nelson. It was about 4 feet deep. And I got it out of the hole and got it back to the car, and it's pretty hard to carry through the woods. It's that much weight, solid weight. I've done that with agate, like 85-pound agates up and down mountains. That's kind of all I wanted to talk about, kind of giving you an idea. This is a painting done by, at that time, was the most sought after painter in the Bahamas. His name was Elio. And Elio and I were really good friends. I've got several of Elio's paintings here in the house, and you can see in the Luther, he does a pink sand. That's what he was doing. His works have been sold all over the world. Let's go on in here for a minute. This cabinet was made by my grandfather, who was a gunsmith in London, Kentucky. And he was also a mason, 32nd degree mason. He was head of the masons down there. And he made 2 of these cabinets, and I've got both of them. Dad had one and I had one after Dad's brother was murdered down in London. He had them, and then Dad and I went down and got these. And those are some of my Kentucky Derby glasses. Justine and I've been going to the Derby since 1967, and I've always gotten 1 or 2 glasses every year from the julep glasses. I've got all those Derby glasses. They're not really worth very much, but they're pretty cool to have a big collection of them. It's one of the best things Justine and I've ever put together. And I don't know, that's over at Keeneland, that scene there. If you go out there to watch the horses parade around. These are some tomatoes that John, a real good friend of mine, grew this year and gave them to me this week. Yellow tomatoes, I love them. Justine fixed me some fried green tomatoes yesterday. And everybody that knows me knows that I carry these green bags around with me wherever I go. It doesn't matter if they're pigeon people, riders, or where I work at, or anything. I ride a lot and keep notes, and this is what I keep my stuff in. And these bags are helmet bags for pilots during Vietnam. The helmet bags that they've got for pilots now are a lot much larger. This little bag's perfect. That's all that is. We come into the kitchen here. Wow, my wife cooks all the time. She's the big cook, and fairly new kitchen. We built this kitchen last year, and I've got furniture from Shakers here. You can see what it is. People that know me know I take a lot of pictures. I take maybe 40,000 pictures a year, somewhere in that range, maybe 45,000, certainly close to that. And I shoot all my photographs, not with just this camera. I've got 4 of these. If one of them goes down, I get another one. I always try to keep 4 all the time, but I use this camera. This is out of all photography I've done in my life, with Nikons and Minoltas and all your single lens reflexes and all the Voigtlander German cameras. This little camera has turned out to be the best camera if you want to go canoeing, spelunking, scuba diving, be out in the rain, in the snow, and if it's freezing hot, this is the baby. And there's not much you can't do with that. And the camera's like a gun. It depends on who's got it in their hands as to how good you can be with it. You know, a good hunter can have a little cheap gun and do well. And photography has a lot to do with who has the good eye. I also understand photography pretty well, so but I love this camera, and this is called a Nikon Coolpix. And that's the camouflage one. They come in about 4 colors. I got this in yesterday. This helmet just came in to me. This is a German helmet. I'm trying to stabilize it. That right there is I'm stabilizing Civil War canteens and Civil War coffee cups and that kind of stuff when we dig them up. A lot of times they'll fall apart on you once the air hits them after you clean them down. Same thing with German helmets. This is a World War II German helmet that was just recently dug in a country called Estonia, which is in the northeastern part of Europe, not too far from Finland. And during World War II, the people of Estonia were conscripted to be German soldiers. And then when Russia went back into Estonia during World War II, they killed or captured all the soldiers, and a lot of the stuff was thrown away or out on the ground. People on the run or discarded. And this is one of the helmets that actually came from there. You can see it was packed in Russian newspapers or Estonian newspapers. And there's the address. There's the man who found it. His name is Roman Megalodon or something from Estonia. I just got that in. It's just something I was working on today to get it stabilized. And I think the World War II stuff is pretty cool. It's really gone up a lot in interest and in value too. World War II stuff, particularly German. Just something I'm goofing off with today. Down here's the den where I spend most of my time. In the winter, I keep a fireplace going here. That fire is usually burning nonstop all through the winter. That's one of the reasons we bought this house, is because we've got 2 fireplaces. And I use a big open fireplace. I don't have any inserts. I put logs in there, and that's the way we like it. I like it being that way. These starfish here all came from around Singer Island, Peanut Island, Blue Heron Bridge. And a starfish will stink when you get him, but you got to clean them out of the back. You got to cut them open, and they're really hard to cut open, or shoot them with formaldehyde. And since I never could ever get any formaldehyde, I always have to clean them, which is a pretty good job because they've got like guts in them and stuff. But if you don't do that, they will stink to the high heavens. But I hardly ever fool with starfish anymore. I see them and just don't collect them anymore. It's something I did when I was young. Those little carvings there, I've got some up there. But my wife's brother, Tim Hall, is a real famous wood carver. He's known all over the United States, and he's made a very good living all his life. As known as wood carver. You can find him on the internet, Tim Hall, wood carver, and he's carved, sold carvings to a lot of celebrities and famous people. President of the United States, Bush, bought a Christmas tree bulb from him, and he asked Tim to come up to put it up on the Christmas tree at the White House. And one story right after another with Tim. He was named Artist of the Year in Kentucky by the governor year before last, which was a real great honor for him and for our family. I've got a gun here. I don't know how many people like high-powered rifles. When my dad died, he had 87 guns, and I didn't wind up getting any of them, thanks to my sister. But we won't go into that today. But this is a gun I bought not too long ago, and it's a 1947 Weatherby, the very first year that they made Weatherbys. And it has a 1951 scope on it, which was the first year that they made the scopes for the Weatherbys. And it's a 300 Magnum. It's sighted in for 300 yards, and it's got jeweled action. And it's an absolute, if you're a Weatherby person, it's a jewel, because it's the first year they made the gun, and the first year they made 4 different scopes Weatherby did when he came out, but this was the most expensive, best scope that he made. This was their long range scope. So just as a collector of guns, this is a really nice, really nice gun to have, whether you're a hunter or not. Just, you know, it's the first year that Weatherby made the gun. I had just a little touch of rust on it there, and I was working on that. Why I've got it down here. Put it over here. But I like to shoot guns, I always have. I want to talk a little bit more about pigeons, because that's what this video is supposed to be a little bit about. I think I've got. I'm opening up just, listen, I've got rooms full of pigeon materials. I wound up being the person that had most of the materials that were in the Heitzman library, which was the single biggest pigeon library in the world. And I read almost every single one of the books that he had and all the magazines that he had. And Heitzman prided himself in having every book that was ever written on pigeons from 1866 or 7 to the present. So it was, and it didn't matter if it was published in Europe or where it was, Heitzman bought it. And to be with Heitzman was to like walk around with an encyclopedia, pigeon encyclopedia. And this is just a little bit of stuff that I happen to have in this right here. These are I don't know. The other day I was digging stuff out, and I didn't even know I had this trunk that was over there. And I said, well, this is some old Heitzman stuff that I've got here. But that's that picture you saw of Heitzman with the Roy A cup. That's inside Heitzman's, one of his lofts when he was at his heyday, like in the late 40s and 50s. I think that loft was one of them that was on top of one of his bakeries. Heitzman was in the bakery business in the Louisville area, in a town called Jeffersontown. You can see a picture of the Pigeons in that particular loft. Heitzman wrote a book on lofts on racing pigeons. There's Heitzman again with a lot of his famous birds. Heitzman almost set the path in advertising pigeons and marketing racing pigeons. No one in the United States had ever was as creative in getting his name out and all the things that he had done any better than Charles Heitzman. And today a lot of guys, advertise and stuff, but Heitzman was the one that started all of this. There was one of his most beautiful lofts that he had in Jeffersontown, and anybody that went to his lofts, he called that his stock loft, and it really was beautiful. It had a concrete floor out on the Avery where he could wash that down, and he would do that every so often, every few days. He kept everything immaculately clean. And there again is some of his lofts that he had when he was in the 1940s and 50s. And that was one of the first hens that I ever got from Heitzman. I called her, she was Strawberry, and that particular bird flew 500 miles from me. That's a real typical red check from Charles Heitzman. He wasn't big into brick reds. He loved them, but most of Heitzman's red checks were red checks. They weren't red velvets. And that's a real famous bird that Heitzman had. That's headwind, I believe. Yeah, headwind, which was a Stassert cross. And here's a picture I took of Charles Heitzman when he was about 10 years before he died. He was still out feeding and watering his birds. And there's a real typical Heitzman Sion. And that's High Time. He named a lot of his birds HEI something or another, had his name at the start of it, or Heat Wave, Hurry Home, whatever it was. It had an H in it, and he did that on purpose. And this was his loft. I called it his Japanese loft that he kept out behind all the other lofts. He kept a lot of powder silvers in there. They were all Sions, and he sold those birds primarily to Japan. But you can see the loft. And I went back to his home several years ago, and everything's gone, of course, now. But this loft, some of it still remains, but it's not a loft anymore. It's just a building. But I was tickled to even get to see the remains of that, because that's all that's left there. There was an entranceway to Charles Heitzman's house. You knew you were coming to someplace special, just going across the bridge and seeing the entrance. Those just again are pictures of some of Charles Heitzman's birds that I took like in 1971 or something out in one of his aviaries. That's Charles Heitzman and his wife on their 50th wedding anniversary. She was a good cook. She treated me very nice. At dinner time, she would come out behind the house and ring a great big bell. The bell is still there behind the house, and ring that bell and signal to us, which we'd be way up behind the house, a football field away. We'd hear the bell ring, and we knew she had dinner waiting for us, and we would come down to eat. And again, that's a picture of the stock loft, so it didn't take very much time to show you. Typical Heitzman Sion. Heitzman wasn't into breeding for a type. He was mostly in just keeping the bloodlines pure. I'm just trying to find something that's a typical Heitzman advertisement. You can see that was his main loft, and his main racing loft that he was famous for, and another loft off from it. There was where his library was at. He built that library from a kind of a block that has an enamel on it. He went to where they made those blocks, and every one of them that had an imperfection in it, he bought a truckload of them and only paid a fraction of the price and built that library. that building kept nothing but pigeon books and pigeon magazines. Trying to find some other stuff here. I don't want to. Let's see what I got. Typical. I love these. This is a typical pedigree by Charles Heitzman in his handwriting. And nobody on earth had more beautiful handwriting than Charles Heitzman. And took time out to go back 5, 6, 7, 8 generations. He really enjoyed going back to his original pair all the time, which was two red check Sions, 1033 and 1104. And I still am able to do that today. But I'm not about to sit down and go back 25 generations on any pigeon. I go back maybe 2 generations. That's all I do. Another very typical pedigree of Charles Heitzman, how detailed it was. He didn't do this with every pigeon. He was doing these pedigrees to suit his own fancy, just reference stuff for himself. And I don't know what else I got here. Newspaper clipping about Sions in France that he had there. That's all that is. I've got a lot of stuff intermingled here. Typical Charles Heitzman envelope. He was big on always having his name on everything. If you got something you felt really special, you knew it was from Charles Heitzman. Everybody had the same feeling. These are very typical letters from Charles Heitzman. He generally wrote by hand, but every now and then he would type. But you can see his handwriting. That's a letter to me. I had, I don't know, hundreds of letters in my lifetime with from Charles Heitzman. He was good at always writing you back. And if you wrote one letter, you could probably get another letter back. This is just his 1960 old bird racing record. What he did on 100 and 200 and 319, 500, a 319, another 500, another 500, and all about him, the things that he pretty much dominated. And he's talking about a man there named Bud Hain up in Minneapolis winning a 500-mile race with his Sions. This is a real famous pigeon of Charles Heitzman's called his twin. Again, a bird that started with an H. And a lot of people don't know it, but Heitzman had a lot of different families of pigeon strains before he ever got into Sions. And he was always looking for the very best long-distance pigeons. He knew that the long-distance pigeons were where the quality was at. And at one time, early in his life, he bought these Marriotts. And they were the most famous long-distance pigeons in the world at one time. And so that's attracted him to those birds. And he sold those birds. There's a brick red cock that Heitzman had in one of his advertisements. You can see. And that's the kind of bird that I breed a lot of right now. I call them clean reds because they don't have any black flecking in their tail or in their wings. And I get those when I make red to red to red to red for 3 or 4 or 5 generations without introducing any black gene birds into that. I'll start to kind of diffuse all that black gene mixing in with the red gene, and eventually I do get a lot of what I call clean reds, where you pull the wings out, there's no black in it, or the tail won't have any black in it. To me, this is a very typical Heitzman Sion. That kind of head, that kind of color, that type. That right there was more, that rounded head, and that color was probably the most typical bird that you would find when you went to visit Charles Heitzman. Although he had a lot of variation in the Sions. It's just like this silver. You can see that it's it's got more of a wedge head. And you can see even right here with this particular blackjack hen morning glory stuff, you can see in these Sions how they're a lot of variation from the other two that I just shown you. They're not a type. They're not a close-knit family. They are Sions, but there was a lot of variation in the Sions at that time. And I talk about that a lot. People say they can recognize a Sion a mile away. Well, no, you can't. You might be able to recognize my birds. There's another 600-mile day bird, a Sion that flew back from 600 miles for Charles Heitzman. And there's a blue check named Harold that flew well for him. And this goes on. This was actually in his library. He had a hen named Helen at the end of World War II, flew 600 miles, and he had pictures of her and stuff up there. That's a little sign that he had in the library. He also had a group of birds that were famous long-distance pigeons called the Logans. And this was his little brochure that he put out selling Logans back in the 1920s and 30s. I think the 1930s more. Let me look at these birds for a minute. No, in the 20s, probably late 20s. That's a 1925 bird right there. So, like I said, Heitzman was always interested. And there's W.W. Marriott right there. There's a picture of him, the guy who he got those Marriotts from. And this is a brochure, sales brochure that Charles Heitzman put out advertising the Marriotts. You can see Charles Heitzman's Marriotts or Marriotts, and then you can, as you go through it, you see the different birds that he was listing to sell. And you could order babies out of those very pigeons from Charles Heitzman. Like I said, he was one of the first guys in the United States that started marketing pigeons that way, and was extremely successful at it. I'm just quick. There's a letter from Ronald Reagan to Charles Heitzman, copy of it. Ronald Reagan. Heitzman was a very strong Republican, a very big Catholic, and was very proud of being such. These are two real classic Sions. Again, these weren't Heitzman Sions there. These are two other Sions that came from the Sion lofts, but were handled by another person. And you can see another variation of the Sions there. Again, I don't want to sit here and do this all day. We've got other things that I can go on to. This is some more. This is a story of me and the Lexington Herald Leader in 1975 when I just won Best in the United States for winning the national show in New York, White Plains. This is a typical brochure that Charles Heitzman put out for his bakery. You can see he and his wife there. This is the story. That's Charles Heitzman when he went deep sea fishing down in Miami. Here's an article I wrote in 1971. You see, that's 50 years ago, over 50 years ago, going on over 50. That's a picture of me, and just talking about Sions in the Racing Pigeon Bulletin. And that's what all these are, different articles by me about Sions in the 1970s primarily. Just some stuff. Again, I have so much, but I wanted to show you a little of it, because when people do pigeon videos, they don't really do this kind of stuff. They're always out in the loft talking about that bird or whatever, but they don't really do the history of the birds. And Sions have such a great history, and I wanted to try to educate some people that don't know anything about Sions. Try to show you that, you know, they're probably the last great family of pigeons that still exist today that are as old as they are, because most of your older families of birds, they're gone. There's an actual envelope and letter from Robert Sion, written in France, to Charles Heitzman. I've got all the original correspondence from the Sions to Heitzman, and he treasured those. He kept them in a cigar box, and I've still got everything, and all of Monstassert's letters to Heitzman as well. Let me see what we got here. With Charles Heitzman's 1939 November sales list. He always listed his birds for sale in November, and as soon as a list came out, his birds were all sold within a week. If he advertised 150 birds, those 150 birds were gone that week. People were standing in line to buy his birds, always. That's a 1939 advertisement. Here he is advertising the Sions. Here's a 1938 sales list before World War II. You can see how he was doing it. He talks about the birds, and it shows pictures of his lofts. Some of the pictures that I've just got through showing you, and some of the birds, how well they'd flown, so that you could get babies or granddaughters or whatever out of those very birds. I mean, he felt very lucky to be able to buy birds like that. There's a World War II sales list. Heitzman was very fortunate during World War II. He donated a lot of birds that went both to China and to England and to both theaters. His son took them there, and Charles would get gasoline ration coupons for donating birds. You could be paid in money, or you could be paid in coupons, and he used those. And he had gasoline to train his birds with, and he said that was more important to him than the money was. These are real typical Sions, with that light colored head. They call that sort of a gay pied or a pied. You see that, and they've got a word in France. It means that they dip their head in powder. I don't know if it's rouge. I think that's the name they use, something like that. I'm probably wrong, but I believe that's correct. There it is. They're talking about the rogue or rouge, or whatever how it's pronounced right here. A 1960 mated pairs from the Heitzman loft. And what have I got here? This is real important, and Heitzman was really proud of this. It's something you all need to look at. This is his original pair of Sions. All his Sions pretty much went back onto these two birds, 1104 and 1033. And if you look at the Sions I have today, you'll see a lot of them that, no matter what I've done to guide them a different direction in type, a lot of them still come out looking just like this. They really had such a strong genes in them to maintain that color and that round head and that type. And that there's so many variations of that, but that's his original pair. And I think the cock was down from Leroy, a blue bar cock. That turned out to be the best breeding Sion that ever came into the United States. I'm trying to get there. I had babies down from this pigeon. This is high white. Heitzman gave me a silver splash out of that bird, and I always loved that pigeon. It was fantastic. That bird was actually had some Sion Stasser, and I think Bastine all crossed into it. They were rangy pigeons. I remember the bird he gave me was a very rangy type bird. Let's see. Well, that's another thing that Heitzman had that probably needs to be mentioned. Heitzman had the Van Brauns. They were beautiful birds, and he was very infatuated with those, and he had those for quite some time and sold a lot of those birds. A lot of people don't remember that or know that. Let's see what else we got here. More pictures. Heitzman loved photography. He loved pictures of his pigeons, and that's one of the reasons that he liked me, because I spent a lot of time photographing his birds. A lot of times I'd go out and stay in his lofts all day long, do nothing but photograph birds. And this is what a typical picture of one of his birds again. There was a man who worked for the Courier Journal, the newspaper in the Louisville area, that was friends with Heitzman, and Heitzman would have him come out, and a lot of these pictures were taken by that man. He did real high quality work for pigeon photography at that time. Of course, pigeon photography's changed a lot now, but during that time there was nobody that really was coming out with any better pictures of pigeons than Heitzman. Here's a bird that flew 1,000 miles, a Sion, a light red-cheeked cock. He called it his 1,000-mile cock. And Heitzman had several birds that flew back from home from 1,000 miles. There's a brick red cock, which you can see he's not, and he's got a little of that black in his wings. Another red check. There's a red hen. So they're black and white. These are a group of Chinese men that received racing pigeons from Heitzman in World War II, and flew them because China was our ally during World War II against Japan, and to this day, the Chinese have still got a few birds that are down from the Heitzman Sions and are flying well there for him. That's a picture of Heitzman when he was very old, getting not too far from his grave, and he always tried to dress nice. He usually wore a nice white shirt and tie, and always kept himself real businesslike. He was very professional and was a fantastic person with people. Knew how to meet and greet people as well as anyone you'd ever meet. He loved this photograph. It's one of Charles Heitzman's very favorite photographs. That's a picture of his home in Louisville during the winter. And he would, in Jeffersontown, on Chenoweth Run Road. And he sent this was a Christmas card that he would send out to his friends. And he had taken that home, and it had been I saw it before he had changed it and changed the roof to it. It had a Spanish tile roof, and it was usually just a kind of a nice farmhouse. But after he got through with it, he turned it into a place that was very elegant. You can see he's got old 51 on the inside. That, like I said, that became his iconic pigeon. Everybody knew that pigeon and knew Charles Heitzman. And I breed a lot of birds that look like old 51 to this day. Here's a Sion that's got a lot of black flecking in it. And I have a lot of people that ask me about the reds. Do they have black wings? Do they have the black tail? And that's usually when you've crossed the black gene and the red gene back and forth for several generations. And there was a reason why Heitzman liked to do that, because when he sold a pair of birds, he wanted to make sure that a person got a male and a female. And if you made a black gene male to a red gene female, then any bird that's the color of its daddy will always be a female, and any bird that's the color of its mother will always be a male. It's the color sex link opposite law. And so he knew just by looking at the birds, by the color of them, he knew exactly what their sex was, even when they were little babies. So he didn't make mistakes when he sent birds out. And that's why, really, the reason that bird has that black in, because Heitzman did practice that so much, mixing that black gene with the red gene. I've talked about that before. This is a picture of Charles Heitzman and myself together out on his bench there. We're drinking Miller High Life beer. Every time I'd go up to see Charlie, he would expect me to bring him a couple of cases of those little Pony Millers, and he liked to drink a couple of those. He was German through and through, and he liked to drink his German beer. Again, there's another picture of Heitzman's beautiful home. I'm wading through some more stuff here. There's a picture I took of Charlie when out in front of his library a few years before he died, and you can see over here is where he had his pigeon graveyard. And one of the remarkable things is, one of those birds that died there, headwind, the leg of headwind sold on eBay for almost $1,800. Just the dried up leg of that bird sold for almost $1,800, which shows you just how popular Charles Heitzman is, or was, and remains so for me. That's a pigeon that he imported from Robert Sion, a pure Sion, and to me that's a classic Robert Sion pigeon. That's the type that Robert Sion went for, that kind of head and that color and stuff. That's inside Charles Heitzman's library, just one small section of it. You can see the trophies and some of the books and some of the mementos that he kept in there. If you were a pigeon person, it was like dying and going to heaven when you walked into that building. He kept it air conditioned. He had a refrigerator in there that he kept Coca-Colas and beer for, depending on who you was. If you wanted a beer, he gave you one. If you wanted a Coca-Cola, he gave you one. And he made everyone sign his register. He was big on getting people to sign when they visited him. And he had people who took care of the Queen of England's loft visit him, and many different famous people came to see Charles Heitzman, his racing pigeons. Here's I don't think a very good picture, but that's another picture of Charles Heitzman and I together out in his lofts. There's a picture of Charles Heitzman standing in front of his main racing loft when he got older that I took. Here's a picture of Charles Heitzman filling up buckets of water to water his birds with around on the side of his loft when he was in his 80s. One of the last pictures I took of his Sions out in an aviary. Here's Charles Heitzman with my wife, Chestine. Chestine and I have been married going on 50 years now. And Charles Heitzman loved Chestine. And he was giving her, not me, giving her that silver splash cock that I was mentioned earlier. And he gave us both lots of birds. That's a little model pigeon loft that was made for him that I'm not sure who wound up getting that after he died. I heard that the University of Louisville had it. I don't know to what capacity they've got that, why they wanted it or where they at. Another picture that I took of his Sions. But that picture was taken, I took that picture in the 60s. So it's, in the 60s, Heitzman was going very strong with his birds at that time. Let me see. There's a sweater that was knitted for Charles Heitzman that was in his library. You can see the pigeon on it. He had ashtrays, you name it, paintings. One person took seashells and made a picture of a pigeon out of seashells, 051, and gave to him. Some person in Japan, I think, did that. Another red check cock of his. Here's a typical postcard that he made. There was hundreds and hundreds of those went out across the United States. And I kept one up in my loft when I was a little boy. I kept it by the door. I loved it. I loved everything about it. And there's a picture of Sion's loft over in France, where Heitzman got his birds, and where the birds I've got now come. You can see it was a 4-story loft. I think the old birds were kept on one floor, and the young birds were kept on the next floor, and I think all the wicker baskets and everything that they used for training and the feed and everything were kept on the next floor. And on the bottom floor, I believe they kept their vehicles for that particular loft. Let me see. Heitzman, he gave these out. You could estimate the speed of your bird. There's a little chart there. You know, if your bird came in 3 hours and 10 minutes and had flown back from 200 miles, you know, you could see that it flew, 1,700 yards a minute or averaged that. He had a little thing that everybody like to have. This is an aerial view of Charles Heitzman's estate. And at the height of Charles Heitzman's pigeon career, I'll call it, he had 41 lofts. About 20 of them were Army military lofts, which he never did tell me where he got them, but I'm pretty sure he got them through his son. And you'd never knew they were military racing pigeon lofts, because he had converted them into, he painted them white and built aviaries onto them, built porches onto them, and you didn't recognize them as military, those portable military. I asked a friend just recently who told me he was one of the people who tore down the old original lofts, what happened to them, and he said he didn't know. He said he thought a man took them north, and some of the ones that they could take north. And again, there's a picture I took inside of Charles Heitzman's library. And I'll stop for the second with this. I could go for days, not hours, days. We'll stop for a second. I'm going to walk down and show you some more stuff. I just wanted to. Already. We're continuing with this video that I've promised a lot of people. Jeremy's following me down. Jeremy is a Cecil B. DeMille's photographer. We're going down in the basement of my home. You can see. Listen, I've had so much glass that I've dug up in my lifetime. Early glass, These are what they call black glass, and this is the glass that George Washington would have been drinking out of. That's a 1700s gin bottle. They have a sort of a very special kind of lip on it, blown glass, and they have a pommel base. You recognize the gin bottles because they're this shape, but they've got to have that kind of neck and that kind of base for them to go way on back into the early 1700s, even before George Washington was born. Same thing about these two bottles. They're rum bottles, and this is a or their ale bottle. This is a typical rum bottle. You see Jack Sparrow drinking one of these. These bottles are, this is the early 1700s when there's a lot of, they're called Dutch onion bottles. And a lot of them were found in a fort in Guyana, and they quit bringing them into the United States. But every now and then you'll find one that comes early settlement in the United States. And the United States ones will bring $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 different depending on the shapes of them and stuff. And that's the 1700s, what they call a cylinder over there. That's actually a fairly rare bottle to find the little ones with that kind of top and that kind of base. And this is again a mid 1700s. When you think about finding treasure ships in the off the Florida Keys or along the Florida coast, this is the kind of glass that you'll find in those shipwrecks. And it won't be as nice as this is. These are almost all Doug bottles. That lock there is a 1700s lock that came out of Charleston, South Carolina, that I cleaned down, and no big deal. Those ice skates were my grandfather's, Russell McLean, and he had those in the 1880s, 1890s. That's my grandfather's ice skates, and he's got his name etched into them there where he pounded it in. And that's a Civil War bullet. That's a 69 caliber found in Richmond, Kentucky. The Battle of Richmond, I metal detected and found it at the surrender site out on going toward Lexington. And this is a bullet mold. That's what they made. This is the bullet mold that they made pistol bullets with. And that particular piece there, during World War II, the way you sent messages with pigeons were with these. You had an onion skin paper that you wrote your message on, and you put it down in here, and you opened that up and you put that around the pigeon's leg, and the pigeon flew back with it. And that's a genuine World War II. I can remember when these were a quarter. Now I see them advertised on eBay for $150. I'm like, what? And this is a Jenny Lind bottle. This is 1830s, 1840s. Jenny Lind was an opera singer that P.T. Barnum paid to come to the United States, and he made a lot of money off of her. She was like the greatest thing that ever came. They made furniture and dolls and hairstyles. Everything had to be Jenny Lind, and they came out with these flasks that are Jenny Lind. And this is a classic early 1840s bottle with that pommel base and that kind of top. And this is this is a bottle that was made while she was here in the United States 20 years before the Civil War. That axe is dated. This is a 1700s axe, but not a typical one. This one came out of Charleston, South Carolina too. I cleaned it down. Just some stuff that I play around with. Lord, I've been through so much of it. That axe, that broad axe, is dated. I think it's 1820. It's a good one. You don't usually see them dated. Just come on down. I want you to see. I hope I get any light here. That's Charles Heitzman's show crate that he kept. I don't know if you can see it or not. And that's the crate that he made. And these are all Charles Heitzman. These were the very best crates that he had when he died. And I've cleaned them up and got them down here, and I keep them almost like, I don't put pigeons in them, just showing them off. That's my father's ashes right there, Earl Robbins. So you can see what I've done with Dad. Dad's up there with Charles Heitzman. That's my daughter, Nancy. And this girl here swam in the Olympics. Nancy, my daughter, swam for modeling. They won the state championship, and she swam for Transylvania. She was a great swimmer. These are all young pictures of my daughter. And my grandson was been a good swimmer. He doesn't swim now, but he was one of the best swimmers in the state. Some stuff here. This newspaper is a real newspaper from Paris, France. And it's the front page of the newspaper that came out in Paris on the day that the Germans surrendered. And it says, La guerre est finie, the war is over. And I got that newspaper from a friend of mine who committed suicide. I was with her, Louisa Lang. Her father was Will Lang, and Will was the single best World War II correspondent for Life magazine. and he was good friends with Ernest Hemingway, and I was working on Will's novel that he'd spent 6 years on. Louise had asked me to do that, and I'd finished 100 pages of it and was reading that to her, and she OD'd, and I didn't know it at the time, and she was off in another room. I thought she'd passed out drunk and left, and came back later on to find out that she'd killed herself. That made a very hard summer for us. And her mother came down from Chevy Chase, Maryland, and said, "Robbie, is there anything in here you want of hers? Because I'm going to donate all of it. I'm not taking anything back with me." And I've got this newspaper that she had hanging up, and that's one of her paintings she did. She liked to paint. And my friend that committed suicide, Lindy Yeager, Charles Yeager, that's his diploma that he got when he graduated from West Point. I bought Lindy's house after he died, and kept it. This is a newspaper clipping of my mother and father, bridegroom nabbed. When my father and mother got married in Irving, Kentucky, they were arrested and put in jail for causing too much disturbance. They had cans behind the car and throwing whiskey bottles out the window and things people do when they first get married. So they arrested them, and that was what happened to them. Training baskets of mine, you can see. And I've got one of Charles Heitzman's very best old wicker Belgian baskets over in there. I've kept some of his ones in really good condition. That's got his name on them and stuff. I don't use those. I've got them put up in garages and put up so, take good care of them. I treasure his old original stuff like that. But this basket was given to me for my 16th birthday by my mom and dad. About 60 years ago, almost 50 years ago. It's a double wicker basket, and I've loved that. That thing's had a lot of great memories and pigeons and stuff in it over the years. All my best birds at one time or another have been in there. That's the dress that when my wife I got married in Eastern Kentucky. That's the dress my wife wore. That's her wedding dress. And that's the suit I got married in. That beige suit, that's the suit I was married in. So I've got her. Neither one of us can get back in them. You get our fingers maybe back in them. Anyway. My grandson Lance was living down here. Right now he's living in an apartment. So he's not down here now. But this has normally been his room down here. It's all solid maple. And I was going to show you my yearbook upstairs, but I didn't get it out. But I'm talking about my record book that I keep Pigeon. He's got a snake over there and a snake over there. And that's some furniture my grandfather made. I don't know what that's something Lance has got. I don't know what on. That's some dive gear. I've come back from Florida a few weeks ago, and I still haven't put the dive gear up. That's just some of the stuff that I brought down. I have to keep gear for about 6 people. So flippers, regulators, backpacks, BCs, dive flags. That big thing over there goes to my surfboard that I had made by one of the top surfers in the United States. And when he sent me the surfboard, I've got it down in Florida right now. He wrote that to me and said, "Robbie, time to go surfing." And that's his name right there. And he built me a 10-foot board. That's fantastic. And Lance is a great surfer on it. Those are some of the yearbooks. That's when I get through doing pigeons each year. I keep on. That's 1 year's record. And I keep, the day they hatch, what color they were, who their parents were. And those up there are lobster sheds, lobster hulls. And I've seen those sell for like $150 each. And if you go down there before the season, when the lobsters are shedding them, you can dive off a boat and sometimes get 2 or 3 and bring them back up on the boat and dry them out. And you can also spray paint them and keep them, not spray paint, you can spray paint them, but spray them with some kind of something that'll harden them and keep the color to them. And that's just some lobster sheds that I've kept. A lobster sheds several times a year. It can, depending on the health, but they actually pull out from the middle of their body, and part of the upper body will pull out, and they pull their tail back out, and they're soft shelled for a little while until that hardens back up. And those are actually hard to find because usually as soon as they get rid of that skin, that's lobster skins. As soon as they get rid of that skin, usually fish will come around and peck on it and break it up and eat it. And so you have to be kind of quick to find one of them, you know, or they get eat up. Those are some bottles that I've dug up at Camp Nelson. Like I said, I've had truckloads of stuff in my lifetime. That's the only whiskey bottle that was ever dug up at Camp Nelson. And I dug that up in the Confederate, where the Confederate prison camp was at. And it's been repaired by a Civil War soldier. And I found a Confederate script eye button and several really neat things right with this jug. So it's a good Confederate. It was there with them. Those inkwells, typical Civil War inkwells, pommel base. Those all came from Camp Nelson. And pickle jars and some more stuff like that. That's a little medicine bottle there I found at Camp Nelson. Pommel base again, that's what you look for in older stuff. Oh, that's a horseshoe crab. It's broke up. This, you know, I have found thousands of arrowheads and have spent thousands of hours digging in my lifetime. And you read all this stuff about buffaloes in Kentucky. This is the only buffalo horn I ever found in my life in the state of Kentucky. And I found this in a field down by the Kentucky River in what they call a Mississippian site, where I found 869 arrowheads in one day. It was a site no one had ever walked through. And in that site was this one horn, among thousands of other relics that I had. That picture right there is of my dad's brother, Lance Robbins. And Lance was in World War II. He was in the Pacific. He was a Marine. And on that day, that's me over there. We were getting ready to go dig underneath a cliff back when it was legal to dig up some Indian arrowheads and stuff. That was down in London, Kentucky. Lance was married 9 times. And on his 9th wedding, he was murdered. He and his wife's boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, got in a shootout. And he got killed in the shootout. And about 7 or 8 years later, the guy that shot him got killed in another shootout. So I was tickled because I loved Lance. He was the single best trumpet player in the state of Kentucky. They used to have trumpet contests to who the best trumpet player was before World War II. And he was a fantastic trumpet player. And a great storyteller. This lock here doesn't look like much, but I dug up as close to a treasure chest as you could ever find in Eleuthera, in the preacher's cave over there years ago. And I dug down into a chest about 4 feet deep. And this was the lock that was on the chest. I broke it off and I cleaned it up. It didn't look like this. It was a lot more rusted up, but I did a lot of cleaning to get this off of that chest. And this is 1600s. These were by the settlers, who the very first people who came into Eleuthera. Eleuthera means freedom, the word does in Greek. And that's what that piece is. That's something I had up at Camp Nelson. Lord, I've had so much. But they would bust up rocks over at Camp Nelson. They had rock foundations for their buildings, and they had rock driveway, not driveways, but walkways in and out of buildings, and fixed rock highways. And that's what this is. It's a piece from Camp Nelson. Me digging over there years ago. I don't have hardly any Camp Nelson stuff left. That's an 869-pound tiger shark that I shot and killed, which is a fantastic shark. He was about 14 foot long, and killed him the same year that Jaws came out. And you can see, there's my hand, how bad tiger sharks are. Easy to tell what kind of teeth they have. They're one of the few sharks that has this beautiful curved teeth like that. And that's a hammerhead, and that's a big hammerhead jaw. And this particular deer rack doesn't look like much. It's a whitetail, because whitetails all come up off at a single time. But this particular whitetail rack is one that I dug at 22 foot deep in the cave where I dug at for 4 years, where I recovered 18 burials that all carbon dated, 3,100 years old, from a chemical research plant in Tokyo. And this is at least 3,500 years old, somewhere in that range. Just a deer antler. This is Tampa Bay agate. They get agate out in out in the coral. That's what it looks like. But when you cut it and polish it, you see it's agatized, and that's called Tampa Bay agate. That's a mastodon. This is a mammoth tooth here. Hold on just a second. If I can get this thing out. That's for guys who are pulling crates of fish down in Key West, lobster traps and stuff. That's what that hook's for. This is a mammoth tooth. You can tell how old a mammoth is by the ridges in the teeth, how old he was when he died. This book here is an actual World War II Pigeon, a book that they used to write messages in. That you saw the message carrier. Well, this is what they wrote the message on, that they put in there. And you could keep a copy, and you send a copy out. It had onion skin paper, but this is the actual World War II message carrier book that you wrote your messages on, that you folded up and put in the carriers and sent the message to with the Pigeon. There's not a lot of them around anymore. This is one of the neat things that I ever found in my life. I found this diving in Eleuthera at Governor's Harbor, which is in the middle of the island. It's a blue glass bead. And I didn't think much about it when I found it. I knew it was sparkling in the sand when I dove down and saw it. And I got it, and finally I took it to a Civil War show and had it out, and a guy walked up to me and he offered me $200 for it. And I wouldn't sell it. He asked me where I found it, and I told him I found it in Eleuthera. It's an Egyptian. It has cartouches stamped in it. And what it was doing there, I don't know, but it goes all the way back to really early times. There was a lot of trading that went on in Governor's Harbor. So it was one of the neater things I've ever found in my life, and I've kept it all these years. It's a blue glass Egyptian bead with cartouches stamped in it. Those are some medals that my father won in World War II. He was in the Merchant Marines, and he was torpedoed twice in the North Atlantic. And Lord, he loved to tell his war stories, especially he had a cold beer inside of him. These are all green flint Indian relics that I dug up at Price Cave back in the 1960s. They all came out of the same cave, and they're motley. The motley period, which was 3,100 years ago, they're in a transitional phase. But you can see that's a motley knife, and that's all they are. They have these stems, something like an Adena, but they're actually not Adena. They're what they call motley. And that's a muskie skull, one of the few muskies I ever caught in my life. And that's when they were making Cassius Clay is a famous politician here in the state of Kentucky, and he was a Russian ambassador under Abraham Lincoln. And when they built his home, his daughter's home here in Richmond, Kentucky, they actually made their own bricks right out where they were. And I had a friend who was disassembling that house that called me and asked me to come up there. And they found animal prints in the bricks when they were taking the walls out. And he asked me, he said, you can have one of them. I mean, not all of them, one. And he had pig tracks, chicken tracks, and dog tracks. And I got the one that had the dog track in the brick. So that's Cassius Clay's daughter's home. These all came out of a cliff overhang up in Red River Gorge many years ago. And this is Adena stuff. And that's some of the Indian weaving. This is all about 2,000 years old. Some cane, some deer hide, stuff that's that old. And that's some petrified wood that I brought back when I stayed out in Wyoming. I stayed out there for a month one time out in the Badlands, antelope hunting and stuff, and looking for whatever I could find. I don't know what else is in here too much. That's Elio. That's the guy I was telling you about. This was the most famous painter in the Bahamas for a while. And I got that painting off of Elio. One night we was in a bar and he had it on the pool table. He laid it out there, and I flipped it over and it had $5,000 on the back of it. I said, man, I love that painting. He said, you don't even know those fish. And I said, oh yeah, that's a queen angel, that's a trigger fish, queen trigger. And I told him Spanish grunts, and he said, yeah, you know your fish. I said, man, I'd like to have that painting. He said, buy it. I said, I ain't got the $5,000. And he said, oh, he said, you're from Kentucky, you must be rich. And I said, well, not as rich as you might think. And he said, I tell you what, I let you have that painting for what you have in your pocket, because I know you must have lots of money. And I said, no, I ain't got that much in my pocket. He said, I told you, whatever you got in your pocket, I'll give you the painting. And I got out like $6 and some change and laid it on the pool table. He said, no, you got more money than that. I said, there it is. I ain't got nothing else. That's it. And he didn't like it. He said, Elio, man of his word, I tell you, you have it. I tell you what, you tell all your rich friends back in Kentucky about Elio. You go ahead and keep the painting. So I kept the painting. It's over my fireplace in the den in there. And Elio's dead, and I don't have any idea what that painting's worth now. And I put it on the airplane with me and kept it between my legs on the seat. When you couldn't do none of that stuff now. I don't think you get anything on an airplane. But that's some of my. These are Champion spear guns. That's my favorite. I've got one still in the box, 1959. But that's the gun that I grew up using, and I can still shoot. I shot a 7-foot Barracuda, world record. I've shot 57-pound snook, world record, with guns like that. Like I said, it depends on who's doing the shooting, where you hit a fish, and how if something scares you or bothers you. So. That's my metal detector, the one I wound up. This is what I hunt a lot of Civil War stuff with. I use this real lightweight Tessero. It doesn't go real deep, but you can go all day long with it, cross fences, go through briars and everything else. And that's a great metal detector. But I would like to have one that goes a little deeper if I get started back now that I'm retiring. This room here is all solid cherry. All this cherry came out of one tree. I had 48-inch wide boards in it, and they got stolen up at the mill. There's some more of my guns. These guns, this is another Weatherby. That Weatherby is a Europa. They were made over in Europe for about 2 years during Vietnam, and it didn't go over very well over there. And I love the gun. It's a gorgeous gun. I had the Action Blue. The mounts are different. They set up real high where the scope's at. Another 300. I found this. This is a bonnet about 20 years before the Civil War, 1840s, which is very rare to actually find. I found it in the rafters of an old Civil War home, a home built 20 years before the Civil War, going toward Berea. I sold it on eBay for $150, and I got it back. I got to wanting it back because I thought, how often are you going to find anything like that? But that's an actual pre-Civil War bonnet that some woman wore working out in the fields. That trophy is one of the few trophies that I've got that I display at all. That was for women best in the United States in 1974 at the National Pigeon Show. I've got many other trophies. Some of them are in these cases here that I've got blank. All these Civil War relics here came from the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky, which is my hometown. And Battle of Richmond, Kentucky Civil War relics are really rare to find. And that's buck and ball. They had you'd shoot a 69 caliber round ball out the barrel. They also had these little bitty buck, they called them, went out with it like a shotgun. So when they shot into a group of troops, you might hit him with one of the big bullets, but one of the little ones would hit him also, and wound him. And a lot of the guys shot smoothbore 69 caliber muskets with that buck and ball. So that's a pedal off of a carriage. Different things. That's a clip for the wick on like a candle. You cut the wick clip there. These are gun tools. Some of these bullets had been wormed, where they pulled the bullet back out of the barrel. And typical stuff from that period of time. That's all. That's my wife's mother, Jean Chisney. She was one of those rosy riveters in World War II. She worked on, building airplanes and things like that during the war. She's a fantastic person. Always good to me. There's a rod and reel I've never used in my life. I'm gonna have to get you to put the line to it. There's my Boy Scout uniform I had. I was in Boy Scouts all my life, it seemed like. As you can see, I've kept everything. That was when I was live. Junior Assistant Scoutmaster, my God and Country Award. all these are all trail metals I walked. And one of these, what was the longest trail in the United States at that time? This one right here was 35 miles. We had to start walking in the dark. The Yellowstone Trail, we walked in the dark and finished in the dark. Started about 2 hours before daylight and finished about 2 hours after dark, and walked all day long and never stopped. So that was a tough metal to get. So that's some of the stuff that I managed to keep. That uniform there, that's an officer's coat in World War II. And that was my next door neighbor's when he flew in the Strategic Air Command, the man who committed suicide. That's his captain's uniform that he had when he was in the Strategic Air Command. That was Lindy's uniform, which, like I said, he was incredible person. Oh, there's more dive dip stuff over there. In here, I don't like it. It's solid cedar. Tongue and groove cedar. I picked out every board. It's another bedroom. There's another place for Lance. And I built this, what I call this UK bathroom in here. You don't need, no big deal, but maybe some short bathroom and stuff. But it's a cedar bedroom. I don't think you see too many cedar bedrooms, solid cherry bedrooms, solid maple, all this. I'm big into wood. So, anyways, this is a Megalodon's tooth, and this is 6 inches. The 6-inch teeth. Once they get to this size, and the way you measure a Megalodon's tooth is to start here and go up this way. You don't measure it straight up. But once they get into this class, they're $1,000 teeth. So this is a high dollar, high quality, unusual tooth. And this particular spinal column piece, you see, that's the kind of whale that lived when the Megalodon lived. And that was one of the, they have actually found some teeth broken off in those whale spinal columns. That was one of the teeth that they ate. I don't know what else to talk about down in here. This whole trunk is full of my mother's and father's photographs and history and a lot of stuff they did. My family came over from Germany and that area of the world. Let's see, we'll stop for a minute. That's my wife, Chestine, and my grandson, Lance, in Harbor Island, which is an island off from Eleuthera. And we had just missed Robert De Niro by about 5 minutes that day. He'd been eating there out on this area. We call it the blue area. It's pink sand. It's a fabulous island to go to. The guy that sings Margaritaville, he sings there once a year in a little bar there. And that's me over in Eleuthera with the biggest lobster I ever caught was 14 pounds. And that, I don't know, 2-3 pound lobster there. And that's Chestine at 135 feet deep. That's the deepest she ever dove. When you get down that deep, it's an unusual feeling to get down there. She's catching a lobster at 135 feet. I took that. That is really an old picture. That's a 1971, something like that, 50 years ago. And she's got on a little wetsuit. God knows what kind of regulator and everything else. I think her nose was bleeding. This is a carving that my wife's brother Tim Hall did. It's a lady slipper. It's a type of flower that grows here in this part of the world in the springtime. Beautiful, very beautiful. And he did that one of the hummingbird over. This other stuff is just some stuff we got at Disney World. There's some, I don't know, Mexican carvers down there, but nothing of the quality that Tim does. Here's Elio's. I want to show you Elio's, that painting that I got from Elio. There it is. The ray and Spanish grunts and the queen trigger and the queen. You can see he signed his name over here. So, yeah, no big deal. All right. And this is August. So I've got, 4 more months to go before this book's full. But this is, anybody that wants to go find out anything about my pigeons, I got pictures of them here starting out. And then the breeders that I started with. Lots of notes, different kinds of notes. birds that got killed this year by that mink. I got that list of that and everything, how that hurt me. And I keep other stuff in there too. This was the entire affair that I had with the Victoria Falls race this year when I judged the birds. I kept the notes on each one of the birds that I judged. And then this right here is the beginning when I first started banding birds this year. My first bird, I just got December down. Then I put the the band number here, and then I go right down there. I put who the mom and daddy is. I put the band number, the color, when they hatched, and who the parents are. And I do that over and over and over again. And then I put notes on the back a lot of times. And you can see that's this year's how I do it. There's one. He's a blue bar, hatched out in May. There's his parents, Ghost, and the silver bar hen. I know who the silver bar hen is. I've got her number. It's just little notes for me. And it keeps on going. Right now, there's some that I banded this week. I've banded about 400 birds this year so far. Last year I banded 1,100 birds. These are just notes to myself, things that I need to get done. I don't know, somebody's trying to call me right now. I'm not gonna look. Then there's an article I did called The Poor Pigeon. I keep a lot of articles that I write that year in the Pigeon, in the yearbook. These are addresses of different pigeon people. There's Dan Hash, and Charles Harris is a real good Civil War friend of mine. He's the one I got a lot of we've done it. Charlie and I brought up 600 muskets out of the Yucatan, which was the largest amount of Civil War muskets ever been found by anyone. And I cleaned those for about 2 years. And they wound up going to the Smoky Mountain Knife Works. They're down there. There's Ken Hamilton's. He's one of the big Civil War dealers and collectors and everything else. Ken and I have been friends for, 40 or 50 years. And Ken's gotten a lot of stuff from me that I found at Camp Nelson. And he's well known for all of his John Hunt Morgan collection. And he's a super nice person. Clark Odell's address. Clark and I have been diving together since he's a little baby, and now he's bigger than I am. And Frank McLaughlin, everybody knows who Frank McLaughlin is. I have run into Frank on a lot of different ways. Okay, Pigeon, people, Bob Robertson, he's a fantastic person. And he goes on and on and on with, I have to keep names and addresses of a lot of different people. And that's what this all is. And I keep a few emails. It goes on. I don't want to talk about everything that's in this, but I'm just giving you some idea of what the yearbook is like. There was some guy that sent me his race results that had done very well with my birds. There's Jeff Lingle's address, and he goes on and on and on. Some guy called Jomo out in California. And that's the way I do them every year. Each year I put that's 64, but that's the year I always put 2021. That's 2021. And the year before that is down in Orlando. I keep 2 years together a lot of times. That way I don't have to go way back on. I've got enough information right there that I can do it. That jug over there was actually come from like the 1700s out of China, and that's when you see these people that would carry. In China, they carry different things. This went on one end of the stick, and then they had another on the end of the stick, and they carried a lot of different things in that particular. That's the real authentic. It's in tremendous condition. I got it from a guy who did a lot of crazy stuff over in Asia. I put that stuff together there. That's Chastain Carruthers, some of his carvings that he was throwing away. He carves in balsa wood, and when he starts to do a carving, he roughs out a form of whatever it is he's going to carve. And he was throwing all this stuff away for me to burn, and it was in different trash piles. And so I saved one here and there and put them together. His carvings don't look like it. This is just a real rough form. He laughed when he saw that. He said he couldn't believe that I kept that stuff. But to me, it was pretty neat. It's like keeping, paint the Van Gogh's palette or something. And that's kind of what it meant to me. I can't afford to buy his stuff. His stuff's real high. And deservedly so. Oh. What else to ramble on about too much? Here's a painting of the pump house where I grew up pretty much in the summertime. Anybody knows me know that I've spent my whole life down around this pump house. There's the jetty wall. When that jetty used to go way out, used to be another wall here, but I stayed there two months this summer. There's been a lot of people go down there that's been inspired by that wall. I don't know what this is. This looks like that's Lance when he was a little boy. He drew the pump house. Oh, that's just fantastic drawing by my grandson. You have to keep all that stuff like that from your grandkids. And it hit the floor. This, Chestine's, my wife's grandparents had a country grocery store, and that's it. This old jar used to sit over there in that country grocery store. That's what that is. Well, we're walking into a glorious place where I spend most of my life. This is where I send all my emails. Everybody knows me knows I send out 200 emails every day of my life. That's me digging in the Price Cave, 22 foot deep. That's me when I was 16 years old. Had that skeleton carbon dated. It was a woman, and she'd already been 3,100 years old. That's my grandfather, Russell McClanahan. I called him Daddy Mac. I was his favorite grandchild. And I know he'd be proud of him if he could come back. I can't say the same for the rest of the grandkids. But he had a lot to do with raising me and loved me and was really good to me. That's what I wound up the inheritance from the McClanahan family, was that picture. And I always said that no wonder I wound up with it. None of the others had enough, after all the things they had done, they didn't have enough whatever you need to look back at him face to face. These are some barracudas that I've speared. That's a beaver skull. I've dug up a lot of beaver teeth. You always know the difference between when I'm digging Indian relics, you always know the difference between a beaver and a groundhog, because the beaver's a lot bigger and the beaver teeth have orange teeth. And a groundhog has white teeth. I had a friend that was fishing at the mouth of Drowning Creek on the river, and he hooked that beaver with a rod and reel and got it in the boat and killed the thing, and he kept the skull. And when he died, they auctioned off all of his mounted fish, and that was in the auction, and I bought that beaver skull of his. The real famous writer that Ernest Hemingway really tried to pattern himself after. This guy was much more genuine than Ernest Hemingway ever was Zane Grey. To Zane Grey from his son at Christmas time. And when he was staying at the Florida East Coast Hotel in February 1926, and a hurricane took that hotel out. It doesn't exist anymore. But I've always loved this. This is his son became a real famous artist. And this is a little sketch that his son had done of him and his daddy, fishing. And they went all over the South Pacific. He was a great hunter. He wrote all kinds of Western books. They made a TV show called the Zane Grey Theater. But I don't know how many books Zane Grey wrote. 75, 100, I don't know. But I treasure this letter of Zane Grey's. He was really an outdoorsman, fisherman. He set a lot of world records catching marlin and giant tunas and that kind of stuff. That's Chestine. That's Chestine right there when she's 52 years old. That's the mink skull. Mink got in my loft. And I had that stained glass window made many years ago. And a girl made it for me for $400 up in Estill County. And I had her that's my wife and my daughter coming out of the Kentucky River in front of this mountain over in Irving called Sweet Lick Knob on a full moon. And they've got a Kentucky agate in their hand. This is the back side of that stained glass window. I designed it, and Girl made it for me. I paid $400 for it. The dentist up there offered me $1,000 for it the day that I got it back. I wouldn't sell it. And that's a dolphin my dad caught. You know, dolphin are also called mahi-mahi if you're in like in Hawaii. And even around here, they say, we're serving you all mahi-mahi. And you go, oh, I got to have that mahi-mahi. That's got to be good stuff. Anything named mahi-mahi's got to be good. That's a wild name. But actually, the dolphin are not all that fantastic fish, if you're going to be honest, compared to snappers and groupers and snook and lionfish and a lot of just grunts and stuff are even better, in my opinion, than mahi-mahi. And if you go down into Central America or South America, that same fish is called a dorado. And if you're fishing off of Florida, the guys down there call them dolphin. And people get mixed up with porpoise and dolphin. And they go, you're going to have to catch a porpoise? And you know, and we're going dolphin fishing. And when you get a dolphin up on the boat, they change colors. And that's in the blue-green phase right there. They turn a gold phase with dots on them. And usually if you hook one, they look like peacocks in the water. They're gorgeous. You can see all that brilliant color. But when you hook one, you get him up near the back of the boat. You leave him on there because he'll attract others. And then you put out more line and start catching the others and start reeling them in. And it's a lot of fun to do. I've gotten to do it a few times and really enjoyed myself when I did do it. That's Chestine when she was 1971 at the Kentucky State Fair. A guy drew that of her. And that was down, that's Chestine that's Chestine and Uncle Lance, the one that got murdered. That was one morning when I caught 18 lobsters one morning, big nice lobsters. Brought them up to the room while everybody was still asleep. And that's why we stayed at the Colonnades Beach Hotel. And that's where I met John D. MacArthur. And I've got a lot of stories about different things that John D. MacArthur and I did together. John D. MacArthur was the richest man in the United States. He had $6 billion. And his room and my room were right together. I stayed in his hotel while he was alive for about 15 straight summers for 13 weeks each time. And I would always bring him down moonshine and country hams. And he loved Chestine and he liked me. And we had a lot of long talks outside, walking around out in front of the building, behind the building, at the bars and everything else. His mother and dad had wanted him to be a preacher. And he laughed about that all the time. But if you go down in southern Florida, you'll see a lot of things that are John D. MacArthur. The largest, richest arts foundation there is in the world is the John D. MacArthur Foundation. You'll see it a lot of times when you're watching television and you maybe see something paid for. It'll be on Nova, something educational, paid for by the John D. and Catherine MacArthur Foundation. And so I think he'd roll in his grave if he knew that the money that he had when he died went to arts, because that wasn't something he was particularly interested in. He was always interested in making money. He hated Walt Disney's brother, because they had cut a deal where part of Disney World was going to be down there on Singer Island, and then he said that Disney backed out of it, and even after they made a verbal agreement and stuff. So, a whole lot of different things about him. I met a lot of people down there during those years that I stayed at the Colonnade. Now the Marriott Hotel is there in that place, so we still stay at the same place, but now we stay at the Marriott Hotel. I don't know what else to tell you right now. I've got a 24-foot cruiser. That's me in that boat. I'm hoping to get it back up and alive again. It's got a brand new engine in it, but I don't know if I'm going to do it or not. It's probably going to take me $12,000 to $15,000 to get it painted and get it all back. And then I got to haul it down to Florida if I do it and leave it down there. So I got a lot to consider. That little boot over there, my mother had those little boots. Back in the 1950s, that was a big thing to do. Parents would get what they call brassed, the shoes of their children, and keep them as mementos. And Mom kept those. That was my cowboy boots when I was, 3 years old or something. And that's all that is. No big deal. All right. You come on in. This is Chestine, one of the bedrooms. This house has 5 bedrooms. This is one of the bedrooms. This is Chestine, my bedroom. And there's another picture done by Elio, another painting. And I love this painting, you know, it's classic Elio. You know, he's got the people of Eleuthera, you know, they live out in the, they live very humbly. A lot of them don't have any electricity or any plumbing. It's almost like camping out in the houses, and they've all got chickens, and they hunt for crabs when it rains and keep crabs to eat. And classic Elio painting. I wouldn't take anything for it. Some more pictures, I don't know. It's my grandson. That's Chestine's father in World War II, Chester. He was in the infantry. He was with Patton's army. And he went all through North Africa, and he went all through Europe. And they had a story about him capturing 8 Germans at one time. I heard, I don't know, but was a real quiet man. Died of a heart attack on his last day at work. He was an engineer. That's Chestine and her dad. He used to take her fishing all the time. And that's my daughter. And that's us down in Cancun, Chestine and my daughter. That's Chestine's mother again. And we stayed at this house several times. It's called the Twin Coves over in Eleuthera, and they shot a movie over there called 3. It's an English movie. That same guy that was the bad guy in the Titanic was the main star in it. But I loved that. Some attorney in New York had built that home for his wife, which was supposed to have been a very famous model. And that's one of my favorite places I ever stayed at all summer, is at the Twin Coves. Oh, it's fantastic. They call it that because there's 2 big coves coming in there. And that's where I caught the 14-pound lobster, was there at the Twin Coves. So, anyway. Anyways, I wanted to do a pigeon video and a rider's video that was a little different, and I hope you've liked it. It give you who I am, you know, a man who's gotten to be past 70 years old now. I'm an old geezer, and you see some of a few things that I've managed to hang on to. Just everybody's got little things they remember. Give you sort of an insight as to who I am. With pigeons, I want the very best, and in writing, I want to be the best writer I possibly can be. And I have plans before I die to write at least 6 more books. I'm doing one right now called The Boat That Never Was. I want to finish a book up on fish, the fish of Palm Beach Inlet and Singer Island and Peanut Island and the Blue Herring Bridge, that whole area. And I want to do, believe it or not, I want to do a book on pigeons, and another volume for the 3rd volume of the Ernest Hemingway book, and I want to redo the Nefarious book.